Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:01. I'm Jeff Cyphers, and I'm calling the meeting of CC Power, the board, together. And I have verified that we have a quorum. Thank you. And not been notified of matters subsequent to posting on the agenda, although I will just make a comment that I feel like our work doing clean power matters more than ever now. So I appreciate all of you. And so I will look to the public if there's any members of the public wishing to speak on matters not on the agenda. You can use the raise hand function, and by now we're probably all familiar with that. I'm not seeing hands raised. Oh, I do see a hand raised. Okay. Yes, Rick Bonilla, please unmute yourself and feel free to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair Cyphers. Rick Bonilla, former member of the board at Peninsula Clean Energy, board of directors, and one of the actual founding members of Peninsula Clean Energy, former mayor, city of San Mateo, retired organizer with the Northern California Carpenters Union, working hard for many years to make sure we get the best renewable energy options going for all Californians and indeed for the world, because we set the pace here. Thanking you all for your dedication. Looking forward to lots of great work coming up this year, and just wishing you a Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonilla. I also see a colleague of mine, Tim Frank. Why don't you go ahead next?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
So I think I'm just going to build on Rick's fine comments. I'm Tim Frank, and I am representing the Workforce and Environmental Justice Alliance, which is worked productively with a number of the member CCAs of CC Power, and we're really pleased to have done so. I'm mostly here just to sort of pay attention and watch today, but you know, it's been a pleasure working with many of you, and we expect more to come. And in light of the changes at the national level, the importance of leadership in California is greater than ever. So, you know, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Appreciate you being here. Any other public comment on matters not on the agenda? Not seeing any more hands. So we will come to the consent calendar. And we have two items, the minutes of December 18 and the acknowledgement and receipt, the resolution of our audited financial statements, which were a clean audit. Appreciate staff very much for that clean audit. Are there any questions or comments? Does anyone want to pull an item from consent? Not seeing any hands on this. So let's check for any public comment on the consent calendar. No hands are raised. Welcoming Director Hale to the meeting. So I'll ask for a motion on the consent calendar.
I'll move.
Second.
That was Valley and Peninsula. So let's call the roll on consent.
Ava Community Energy.
Yes.
3C
Yes.
Clean Power SF.
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy.
Yes.
Redwood Coast.
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy.
Yes.
Silicon Valley.
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power.
Yes.
And Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
Consent agenda is approved.
Thank you, Counselor. So we'll go to our regular calendar, and item 6A is our election of officers. And I've been alerted to exactly one person for each slot. So we'll see if there's more interest, but I've been alerted to interest by Lori Mitchell to serve as chair, and I appreciate that, having served as vice chair this past year. Mitch has alerted of interest for treasurer and Howard for secretary. I have been asked to serve a second term as vice chair, although I'm open on that if others want to consider. And so I think my official action will be to nominate Lori Mitchell for chair. And is there a second for her serving as chair?
So move.
I saw a hand first. I saw Director Padilla first, so I'm going to call her as the second. Thank you.
I cheated.
But I appreciate the support. So let's
I second the
let's
motion.
call roll on Director Mitchell as chair. Or
Mr. Chairman, I'm very
Should
open
we-
to doing all this in one lump, and so just to make
Okay.
it not have to do
Um,
full roll calls.
then I think I should ask for any further input and comments because I've just expressed what I have heard from the directors. So let me open it up. Are there any further nominations or comments on this from the board? And just to reiterate, this is Lori Mitchell as chair, myself as vice chair, Mitch Sears as treasurer, and Howard Chang as secretary. I'm not hearing comments. So and I thankfully for this process point, I get to now call for public comment before asking for a vote. So I appreciate the interruption. So let's ask for any public comment on the nominations for officers. Not seeing hands on this item. So let me ask for a motion on all four of those appointments.
Could I move, at the pleasure of Director Padilla, modify her motion to include the other nominees that the chair noted?
It's certainly
Do you
acceptable.
Do you accept that, Monica?
Yes,
Then I second.
All right, so let's
Motion.
call the roll on all four of those nominations.
And because we had the identity of the officers,
Read
Blank,
into the
read
record.
that off in the resolution, and I'll use some terminology and I'll explain it after I'm done. So be it resolved that the Board of Directors of CC Power hereby elects Lori Mitchell as chair, elects Jeff Cyphers as vice chair, appoints Mitch Sears as secretary, and appoints Howard Chang as treasurer. The appoints and elects, I can't tell you what the difference is other than it's in the Joint Powers Authority.
If I may, the language sounds good, but the appointments of the last two were flipped. So Mitch Sears as treasurer, Howard Chang as secretary. Am I correct in that? That's what I heard. Okay, all right.
I understand it, yes.
Thank you.
So why don't I do that? And I apologize for transposing that. So we have Lori Mitchell as chair, Jeff Cyphers as vice chair, Howard Chang as secretary, and Mitch Sears as treasurer.
That sounds good.
And we have a motion and a second, and we'll do a roll call vote. Ava Community Energy.
Yes, and thank you. Happily accept the appointment, I should say. So yes.
Central Coast Community Energy.
Yes, and thank you all for your willingness to serve.
Clean Power SF.
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy.
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority.
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy.
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
yes,
Sonoma Clean Power Authority.
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution is approved.
Thank you very much. And I will pass the virtual gavel over to Chair Mitchell. Thank you very much.
Great. So we are on to item 6B, our general manager update. So I will pass it over to Alex.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you. And just wanted to also thank Rob Shaw, who served as our secretary this past year. Is not staying on as a CC Power officer, but in the interest of mixing causation with correlation, it's worth noting that Rob has been appointed as the chair of Cal CCA. So Howard, since you're our new secretary, I think I should just warn you that may be in the future for you. And I look forward to working with everybody again this year. I think there'll be plenty to do, and you'll see some updates today about what's coming. For several months, we've been incubating a lot of ideas, and those still aren't quite ready. As you guys know, at the end of each of our phases, there's typically a go, no go decision that's attached to a scope of work. And a lot of those are in development, and we're iterating them with your staff. There also has been some recent action federally, so we're trying to understand the implications there and some of the projects we've been eyeing may or may not be implicated to some degree. So a lot going on, and I welcome questions at any time throughout this update. Amy, if possible, let's put the slides up. Thank you. And so we're discussing only item 6B. There is one more item after this, so it'll go back to Chair Mitchell. Let me start with administrative updates. Very exciting to all of you is that our Secretary Mitch Sears and I have been working on some reserves policy. And so we've started to do the basic groundwork for looking at how we would define the reserve build amounts and then cases for using the reserves. This had come up as a policy need several board meetings back. So this is underway, and potentially in February, we'll be able to roll out a draft proposal for review. If you have any questions, Mitch and I are, of course, happy to discuss. Also, and I know it's confusing, it says Q3 and Q4. So we're on a fiscal year from July to June. So we are closing the books for the first half of our fiscal year, which was the second half of 2024. We'll have those available in February. And that's also a time where we'll understand what the balances are in all of the project accounts. And that's a time where then we'll go back to the approved budget. We'll see how much we're supposed to invoice people for, and we'll reduce it by any amount or balance left in your project accounts. So those upcoming project invoices will go out on the power project side. And then lastly, we'll be issuing invoices for some recent bulk buys, the WoodMac subscription, and a Gridwell RA report. And then lastly, the work and budget planning is underway, but that's a separate agenda item that we'll discuss in length momentarily. So next slide. Just to revisit these upcoming project considerations, it is important that the board know what's coming. And so in the coming months, we'll most likely be bringing relatively defined scopes of work with attached budgets and a picture of what we're trying to achieve in the phase 2. These would all be for phase 2s, meaning that would be where we work to solicit, negotiate, and or finalize a potential project. And then the project at the end of that phase 2, members would then opt in if they want based on the final negotiated terms. When we get into phase 2 or phase 3s, we set up an official body that doesn't have decision-making authority, but it's also the formal vehicle for interacting with your teams. It's called the Project Advisory Subcommittee. And so that's really how we work to make sure that anything we decide in those projects that doesn't need to come to the board has a lot of input. And then also in instances, it may still come to the board for the right board level approvals. So those phase 2s are coming. There's going to be a handful of them, we expect. And in some cases, I just want to also note, we try to use our language of phase 2 clearly, but in some instances, it may make sense to break it up. And so a lot of the spending inside of phase 2 has to do with milestones. And so if it makes sense for members to sort of back out of a phase 2 at a certain point, we may break the phase 2 into a phase 2A and a phase 2B. And as many of you know, we did that with the build transfer solicitation phase 2. And the reasoning there was that we wanted to see the results of the solicitation being the 2A. And it was only at that point that members would really know if they wanted to move into a 2B. So we separated that. And so we'll always approach it as logically as we can, but I wanted to just explain how we might break it apart. So on the next slide, you'll see some of what's going to be queued up. We expect pretty likely a long duration energy storage tolling agreement. And then we've also been looking at a couple wind PPAs. These wind PPAs may or may not be affected by some of the recent considerations happening federally. And then there's some additional items coming. One is the RA power pool. The concept is still being studied in phase 1 with the working groups. But we do see a path forward for finishing up that study, and that would then have enough information for members to decide who is, if anyone, interested in moving to a phase 2. So that could occur as soon as March, but maybe April. One of the timing considerations on the power pool concept was if and when this could be activated, and what does that fit within the RA cycle for members. So we still want to do a good job with the study. And then after that, depending on what we find, we'll decide if it should be rushed or not. It might look complicated, and so it may not be worth rushing. Okay, and then just the last quick update, and using the general manager's signing authority, only 2 items. The bulk purchase of the Gridwell RA report, that was pursuant to a resolution the board passed in December, and then similarly a bulk purchase of the Wood Mackenzie data sets and information reports, also passed in December. And so now we're working with the members who opted into that, and we'll be issuing the cost sharing agreements, et cetera. Chair Mitchell, I see a couple hands raised. Would it be okay if I call, or would you like to call? And I did not see who raised their hand first.
I believe it was Sean first, then Jeff, Barb, and Rob. I think.
Okay.
So, Sean.
Thank you. Couple quick questions for you, Alex. Thank you very much. One, I just wanted to confirm the Lava Ridge project, which potentially, I mean, it was cited by President Trump in his executive orders. So I guess you'll get back to us once you determine whether or not that's a go, no go.
That project had come through our solicitations, and as you know, we've been looking at it. And so, yeah, that project now, we've already outreached to the developer to see what happens. But I think our guess is that this may indicate some level of slowdown for that project, and so we'll be reporting back.
Okay, cool. And then just to confirm, the Cadmo project is potentially not impacted by the executive order because that is in state jurisdiction. Is that correct?
That's mostly correct. The one question for Cadmo, so as many of you know, Cadmo is the 60 megawatt offshore wind turbine off Lompoc. 4 turbines, maybe increasing to 6. It's only in state waters, and it's a state level sanctuary, is my understanding. The one question though is where and how do they route their interconnection? They have an interconnection position, but where do they route their gen tie to the interconnection location? So there's probably many permutations, and we're actively discussing that with them. One option that I know they've looked at was through a military base. And in a sense, you know, this would be a right of way. So some of our thinking recently was that, you know, requesting a right of way on military base property it might relate to offshore wind, but we didn't see it the same as being a federal lease area for offshore wind. So we weren't really sure how those different levels of federal oversight would be treated. What we read in the recent executive order was, though, that right-of-ways for permits to cross land were looped in as something that was going to be paused and scrutinized. So we've outreached with the developer, and also that was a phase 2 we were looking at. And again, we don't know now what the other route options might be, et cetera. I think that was scheduled to be online as soon as 2029. So another question would be if and how long these delays are and how permanent they are. What does that mean for the project schedule? So we'll be chatting with them, and that will then get looped back to everybody through the phase 1 deliberation. And then, you know, if we think it's appropriate, we'll inform everyone about where things stand for a phase 2 go, no go decision.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
On the plus side on that project, just worth noting, originally they were looking at 4 projects and 4 turbines, and then they had previously looked at some of a nearby loads, a big load nearby, their needs for their own sources of power, and so they were looking at maybe splitting how the project power would flow and adding turbines, and that actually could decrease costs in a productive way. So, you know, there's some good news, and then there's also some other news that may impact the schedule.
Okay, great. We will go to Director Cyphers.
You already got to my detailed question. So my general one is, as you think about the impact of federal changes, the wish list is to keep informing us on what you're learning. And on a more proactive basis, I think this year is a good year to bring us recommendations on how we can sustain forward momentum on projects like this, or alternative projects that achieve similar goals in an environment where renewable energy was essentially excluded from from the support of at least the current executive order. So those are general comments and nothing urgent, but it's just for this coming year. Thank you.
That's well received, Vice Chair Cyphers. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we'll go to Director Hale. You're on mute, Director Hale.
Thank you.
Okay.
Quick comment on the general subjects that we've been talking about so far. I mean, I think part of what we need to do is make sure that our legislative allies know how what's being issued from Washington is impacting us. So I ask the executive director to please think about how we are performing those tasks, working with the executive committee. And then I have a kind of an administrivia kind of a question or point to raise. And that's just to say, as you talk about the phases, that's helpful, Mr. Morris, but I think on the day-to-day, we're having a hard time tracking when we're shifting from funding it as G&A to funding it as project, that kind of stuff. It feels like most things are getting funded as projects, but it's hard for us to really budget our G&A. And I think that's because we're not always understanding when we've shifted. So maybe talking about it in terms of where it's being funded from will help drive that home for folks, as opposed to just referring to the phases.
Well received, and I'll improve that as well. And we've dabbled in a couple of different slide formats that we think may help, and so we'll continue to resurrect and use those if we see them productive.
Thank you. Appreciate your taking the feedback. Thank you.
Great. We'll go to Director Shaw.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. Alex, for the RA Power Pool process, when we had an opportunity to meet in Davis and see the demo and talk about it, I think it was presented much more as a resource adequacy optimization tool. And at least internally with my staff, I think the concept of a buying pool, an RA buying pool, is a different concept. So I didn't, whether or not you have arrived at a consensus of what is the overall goal and function of that, I'm much more interested in it as a optimization tool as opposed to a buying pool. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit on where your current analysis of that is, and then if you kind of see a decision point around, is this intended to be optimizing our compliance, or is it intended to try to improve purchasing capabilities?
Excellent question, Director Shaw. And I think this is relevant for many of you, and I'll explain why. So the consideration of the RA pool really would be an optional optimization pool, at least as we foresee it. The idea is that by sharing information with a central optimization, it can then identify transactions that may boost efficiency for all members and yield savings. The preliminary study we did showed that there's a lot of ways you can design these optimizations. And given CC Power's role of serving members with sort of a la carte cafeteria menu options, we wanted to keep it much more on the side of a flexible optional tool that members can decide how much they want to use. There's other benefits to doing that, which is that it avoids some of the thornier legal and jurisdictional issues, and really it's just serving as a sort of a matchmaker function. And we know that some members have already experienced some matchmaker function type RA transaction support tools, and we would be looking to build on that type of project. So where we were was we originally studied it at a high level, and then we're doing another study. The new study is to look more specifically at actual members' portfolios. And what that will do is it'll help members have, significantly more information about the potential value. We think there may be, up to multiple millions of dollars per year in value here. And again, it's still an optional tool for members. So we think what this study, this last study will do is it'll set members up to decide if they want to pursue the harder work of, can we design this in a way everybody's comfortable with? How would we participate? What other rules would it be involved? To support that, we have run some of the traps on legal risks. And so we have strong legal opinions indicating that the process we're on would not create legal risks as we have it designed. And then the next step is to follow up with all the members to get their portfolio information through this data request we've issued. And then we'll be able to finish the study probably within a month. So I'm hopeful that to work with your staff, everybody should know we also have conducted a couple workshops, and we've completed what I call a point counterpoint assessment. So we tried to gather all the concerns from members and then, really look at them and see if they were a fatal flaw or something that was worth changing the approach we were on. In the end, we concluded that probably the most cost-effective, expedient approach is to stay the course, get this study done, and then everybody will have sufficient information for deciding if they want to go into a phase 2 decision. And by that, Lori, Director Hale, I mean switch from a GNA funded exercise to a members opt-in project type of exercise. Does that help, Director Shaw, or do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I think that does help. If I have other questions, I'll try to connect with you or Philippe.
Yeah, and just to one of the, and this is in the point counterpoint document, I know the word pool is confusing and may be the wrong name for this exercise. Currently, there's no plan for this pool to serve as a buyer in any way. It's really just a matchmaker function. And I think that's been a concern that I've heard from some staff of some CCAs. And so I want to emphasize that as we've initially designed it, really erring on the side of a light optional tool. There's no buying function. It's just a matchmaker. There is complexity for sure, but there's a lot of bells and whistles you can add to a pool like this. But we thought that the most appropriate solution, that as we understand what may help members and what their capabilities are, is just this optimization matchmaker function. And just to give people, many of you are familiar, NCPA has a different structure where the whole operation of a portfolio can at times be seeded and managed by NCPA, and that's really not at all what's being contemplated here. So I do think maybe naming it a pool was incorrect, and we'll work on a naming convention that's more fun. And so if you have branding experts, I'd appreciate that. All right, back to you, Chair Mitchell.
Okay, great. Let's go to Director Padilla.
Yeah, my questions were also about the RA, whatever you want to call it, matchmaking service. Just kind of at a really high level, can you give me a sense of the timeline on when you're going to make a determination on whether to move to, I guess, the phase 2 step? And do you have any sense of how much diversity or how much participation we might have in that? So I think we talked about that when you did the workshop, that really for this to be effective, you need volume, but more importantly, you need diversification in the load and resources. And then last, and maybe you can't answer this yet, but kind of what an expectation is of a budget associated with this under phase 2B. And certainly if you can't answer it now, I'm happy for you to get back to us on that as well.
Yeah, I think if you're okay with it, Director Padilla, I'm happy to follow up. We do have some very crude preliminary budget estimates. A key question in that is, how much of the optimization spending do we estimate into the phase 2? And so this might be an example where we spend time designing it as a phase 2A before we spend money on the optimization function, and then the prices go up because you would then have to pay for a software package. So we can work on that. This study we're undertaking also is designed specifically to address your question, which is, our members' portfolios diverse enough that when we come together, there is real value? Because in the original study, we had assumptions that were partially based off actual data, but not full pictures of what members' portfolios are and what could be offered into the pool. And so we're also going to look at a couple sensitivities. For instance, if we have only a few members participate, is there real value here? And our hope is that this is enough information for members to say, okay, this is worth it if enough of us participate. Is that going to happen? And if not, we can not pursue this. So that's the type of iterative thinking we expect heading into the phase 2 go, no go.
And you think that all that will be done by the end of Q1?
I do think, yeah. So the study's been designed, really the critical path now is to get the portfolio data. Once that's plugged in, the analysis can occur. And I think they can toggle pretty quickly in their tool, whether you're including member X, Y, or Z's portfolio or not. And you can see how much value is transacted and saved from the pool. I also asked them to develop a report that is scoped in, and the report will then be a written document that helps members really look through and understand the work. And you'll also recall in the original study, we had a whole section about what governance principles would need to be considered. And we know that the governance and the participation structures really need to be solidly thought through. But since that's pretty time consuming, we wanted to see first if there was initial value. And only then would we go into phase 2 and members would work through the participation requirements. Does that help, or are there further questions, Director Padilla? And I'll follow up with you with the initial budget estimates and scope of work for phase 2.
Okay, great. Any other comments on item 6B? Not hearing any, so we'll go to the public. Any member of the public wanting to comment on 6B? Okay, then we're on to item 6C. Alex, did you want to provide an overview of this? And then I have some additional nominations for a budget ad hoc committee that I'll talk through in a moment.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Maybe I can just give a quick summary, tee this up, and then hand it back to everybody. So for the last 2 years, I've helped shepherd CC Power through its budget and work planning exercise, and I would say we've come a long way. And some of it is in the rigor and detail of the budget forecasting process, and some of it also is in the process. What I wanted to communicate with this staff memo to the board is much more about the process, and specifically sharing how there's a bunch of steps that will be occurring to make sure we get fairly specific and direct input from every member. That's going to inform all of our work, both on the G&A side and on the project side. As part of that, we'll also be helping members see what work is going to be ongoing into next year. And a good example of that would be working on scheduling coordinators for our power projects, executing on that work going forward. And then also we wanted to have an opportunity for members to share and prioritize what they think would be the most value for them. We know, for instance, that some members may want CC Power to focus on portfolio and technology diversity projects that they may not otherwise do. And then other members may be interested in shared services. So there's definitely a difference in members' interests, and we're trying to put together a work plan that fairly serves all members while still achieving the already approved project goals, et cetera. So the main steps are member-specific meetings, and we'll come to you, and we look forward to meeting face-to-face. And our primary goal is to meet with the CEOs and then also procurement directors, and any other staff are of course welcome. But we know that that's really where most of the focus is near term. And then we're also with our director of origination, Philippe, setting up a meeting with your procurement directors. So all of the procurement directors will have a chance to dialogue together about what their priorities are within reason and what they can share, so that everybody's understanding how we can work together and use CC Power to serve members optimally. After that, we'll also run a survey, and by then we'll have a fairly comprehensive list and a draft work plan. And then we'll shift into the budgeting process. So once we know what we're trying to achieve, we're then trying to resource it as smartly as we can. And the budgeting process historically has not had formal levels of engagement from aside from board meetings. And so this year we're looking at potentially, if it's appropriate, an ad hoc budget committee to try that out as a way to get more direct board engagement, and then also a staff level working group. Working groups are the language we use for really staff level discussions. There's typically no decision authority to a working group, and so it's not a Brown Act activity. But the working group is a really good opportunity for us to be briefing your staff, because we know that throughout the year we work with your staff a lot on queuing up opportunities and projects or options for them to consider. And so we wanted them involved in the planning work a little more, so they understand what's coming down the pike and know how to engage or know how to review it or know what we're prioritizing and why. So that's it. And then one last thing is to set the menu. We go back to a few things. One is the 2022 strategic plan, which is really a board level document directing CC Power to grow capabilities across time. In a sense, I think of the strategic plan as looking at least a few years ahead, because it shares and shapes what CC Power might grow into. But we also then have some near-term input from the members from our offsite last fall in Davis, where we discussed a bunch of ideas, both near-term and then medium-term. And then lastly, we'll be working with members to just source any ideas. And then we chew on all those, and each one of those can have its own scope of work, and then that can inform the ultimate work plan and budget. So those are the steps, and I apologize if that's not clear, but hopefully it's clear in the memo. And with that, Chair Mitchell, I welcome any questions, or I hope the board discusses as appropriate.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for putting together the staff report. I found it really helpful, and I think we've come a long way in terms of our budget planning. I will open it up for a comment in a second, but before that, I'd like to nominate a budget ad hoc committee. And I'm hoping that Director Padilla, Director Marshall, our treasurer, Director Sears, will join me on the budget ad hoc committee to ensure that we continue to refine this and make sure that the budget process works for all of our members. So that is my motion. See if there is a second or any comment on that.
Oh, just a question on order.
Sure.
Is the chair's unique privilege to do that if people are willing, or do we need a vote?
We do not need a vote.
Well, great.
Remember. I almost called you chair. We do not need a formal action. In fact, I think the chair can handle this, and just head nodding from the board would be sufficient.
Great.
Chair, I'm happy to participate for the record.
Great. Director Padilla and then Director Hale.
I too am happy to participate, and I think this is a very important kind of step in the evolution of CC Power to kind of bring our own working knowledge of how these budgets get developed in our agency and what works for each one of us, and hopefully come together and bring something that'll work for all of the members at CC Power. And so I appreciate the work that you've done so far, General Manager Morris, on this, and certainly Chair Mitchell on proposing this ad hoc committee.
Great. I look forward to working with all of you. Director Hale.
Happy to hear the plan here. And I'm particularly interested in how we're going to balance the interest in so many activities with the concerns about how fast this organization can grow. So I'm looking forward to the ad hoc committee's attention to that. Also to how the costs are allocated across the members. I know in prior meetings we've talked about whether the cutoff cap whether that's at the right spot. I know in some of the other organizations we all belong to, we're often asked, what's our revenue? How do we, and that is kind of like a keying off point for how much we all contribute to the organizations. What revenue measure is used for what purpose? I mean, we all have various methods and uses for our projections. And I always wonder when I answer that question, which version of that answer is everyone else giving? And it would be nice to have some consistency in how we use what inputs we use to make those kinds of cost allocation decisions. So I'll look for the budget committee to be thoughtful about that issue too. The ad hoc committee, that is. Thank you for pulling
Yeah.
it together, Lori.
Yeah, no, thank you, Barbara. That's a really good point. It's just so important how we balance, the needs of all the various members that we have. Some are large and some are smaller and some are medium. And so it's just going to be a really important issue to address. Howard.
Can I just clarify? I know this is sort of named as the Budget Ad Hoc Committee, and I just want to understand if this is maybe a broader scope than just budget and really thinking about work plan and prioritization. Is this kind of one and the same, or are these separate and distinct, I guess, objectives for this group versus, general prioritization?
Yeah, that's the good question, Director Chang. I really view it as focusing on the budget, but necessarily we're going to have to get into some of that prioritization. But really, I think the committee will focus on what the board has prioritized and really try to keep it narrowly focused on the budget. Is my vision for it.
Okay.
But I'm open to other comments from, other directors if you wanted us to expand that.
My only maybe add-on comment there is it feels necessary to maybe focus first on the work plan and the priorities, and that will drive the budget as opposed to the other way around. And so just making sure that there's good direction on the prioritization, and then of course that can feed into how do you budget, how do you resource that?
Yeah, it's a good comment. Yeah, no, thank you. Director Sears.
Yeah, I'm happy to serve as well and feel somewhat obligated due to my title, but I'm happy to serve, of course. And I think Howard makes an interesting point. Seems like that's a good, maybe one of the first discussions for the group to have. So happy to serve.
Thank you so much, Rich. And yeah, your role as treasurer is going to be so important here. Okay, any other discussion on this item?
Chair Mitchell, if I may, I just have one quick response to the end conversation. It's on page 48 of the packet. There's a timeline of both in the work planning phase, which should occur first, to Howard's point, and then the budget. And you'll see that the potential board, or what used to be potential is now enacted, the ad hoc committee really kicks in March is the expectation. And that's really as the planning process has gathered a lot of the information and is winding down. And, Chair Mitchell, we can discuss how we can come back to the board with updates on the planning side, which then is planned to inform the budgeting side. And the budgeting is, to Director Padilla's point, there's a lot of gray area with how do we assign costs, how do we figure it out, what's the resourcing strategy that makes the most sense, are we prudent while still building capabilities? So I do think budgeting is its own challenge, and it's probably easier to get a work plan that we're comfortable with and then to try and do budgeting versus having too much iteration between them.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that clarification. So look forward to all of you meeting with Alex and your team's meeting with him to talk about priorities. And then in February, we'll discuss that as a board, and that will feed into the budget ad hoc committee. Okay, any other discussion on item 6C? All right, then I'll go to public comment. Any member of the public wanting to speak? I think not seeing anything there. Okay, so we're on, oh, Rick Benita, I see your hand was raised.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I want to say that I appreciate the creation of the ad hoc budgeting committee. And I think that it's appropriate that also there could be staff level working group on budgeting items. However, I think that actual work plan should be conducted in the public forum, as I think it has been in the past, so that public commenters can have access and make comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other member of the public wanting to speak on item 6C? All right, I'm not hearing any, so we're on to item number 7, which is discussion of any individual member items. Anyone have anything for item 7? Any member updates we should be aware of? Yes, Director Cyphers.
Just to wish that if folks want to go a little deeper on the Moss Landing fire with the battery storage project, I'm very active on learning what I can about that and just understanding industry impacts. That's all. So it's just an invite to send me a note if you're interested.
Great. All right, any other items any individual member wanted to discuss? Item 7. Okay, we'll go to public comment on item 7. Any member of the public wanting to speak on item 7? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all, the new officers, and excited to work with all of you and the new ad hoc committee members.
Happy New Year.